Melee is the oldest combat style in RuneScape with one simple objective. Channel your inner barbarian and go bonk. And let's say you watched a video explaining how to get your attack, strength, and defense levels from 1 to 99 and beyond. How do you intend to use your abilities for said bonking?
Bonking? We love bonking!
Go back to your corner, Chev.
I'm sorry.
Because this is a large topic, I'll be breaking Melee into two videos. The first going over general information about Melee abilities and a basic understanding of how to use them, and the second covering all the equipment Melee has to offer. Grab some coffee and a notepad, and welcome to Combat Dummy. Before we talk about the abilities, we need to cover some vocabulary that will be used throughout the video. Ability damage refers to a damage calculation based on your weapon damage, armor, and combat style level. In this case, melee. The math doesn't matter outside of higher ability damage equals more damage. Stun means your target cannot attack you for a period of time, and bind means your target cannot move from where they're standing. These do not stack and can be overridden by other players in a group combat encounter. Channeled means that you have to charge your ability or the ability deals multiple hits, and if you move, the ability is cancelled. Damage over time means the ability does damage over time. Pretty simple. And just like with stuns and binds, they also don't stack if other players use them. Bleeds and burns are damage over time abilities that deal 2 times damage if the target moves. We good to move on? Great, let's start off with basic abilities. Slice has a 3-second cooldown and deals 95 to 115% ability damage. It also deals 40% more to a stunned or bound target. Backhand and kick are the only basic stuns for melee. They're basically the same ability. Both deal 60 to 75% ability damage, stun the target for 1.2 seconds, and share a 15-second cooldown. The only difference is that kick also knocks the target back by 1 tile and binds them for the same amount of time. This is only useful if 2 conditions are met. First off is if the target can even be moved. The second being that the target has a bleed or burn applied, since moving the target will increase the damage from those effects. Fury has a 15-second cooldown and deals 110 to 130% ability damage. Fury also increases the critical strike chance of your next melee ability by 25%. Critical strike just means the ability does 1.5 times damage. Sever has a 5.4 second cooldown, dealing 110 to 130% ability damage. This also decreases your target's damage by 10% for 4.8 seconds. Punish is honestly an ability that I completely forgot existed. It has a 24-second cooldown and deals 75 to 95% ability damage. The only reason I can think to actually use this ability is that it deals 2.5 times damage if the target is below 50% health. Dismember is the only bleed on this list. With a 15-second cooldown, it deals 25 to 31% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 5 hits. There are a few things you can do to increase Dismember's damage potential, but that's for Melee Combat for Dummies Volume 2. Barge has a 20.4 second cooldown and deals 75 to 95% ability damage that will cause your character to charge at a target up to 10 tiles away. It also binds your target for 6.6 seconds. Next up are Havoc and Smash. They share a 10.2 second cooldown and deal 100 to 120% ability damage. The main difference is that Havoc is dual wield specific, where Smash is two-handed. The same story can be said about Decimate and Cleave. They have the same 110 to 130% ability damage and are dual wield and two-hand specific abilities. However, they do not share the same 7.2 second cooldown, meaning you can use Decimate with dual wields, then switch to a two-handed weapon to use Cleave. Cleave can also hit up to 8 targets in a 2x3 area centered around your character. There are a few more abilities, but I'll save those for Chapter 4. Alright, we have the basic abilities squared away and building adrenaline, so what about thresholds? Slaughter is a bleed with a 30-second cooldown. It deals 30 to 40% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 5 hits. Unlike most bleeds, Slaughter deals 3 times its ability damage if the target moves. Forceful Backhand and Stomp are like their basic ability equivalents. Shared 15-second cooldown, 120 to 140% ability damage, and a 3.6 second stun on your target. Stomp also knocks your target back by 1 style and applies a bind. Flurry is a dual-wield ability that has a few quirks to it. It is both a channeled and AoE ability. With a 20.4 second cooldown, Flurry can hit 4 targets in a 3x3 area, dealing 60 to 70% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 4 hits. Quake is a two-handed AoE ability. It has a 20.4 second cooldown and deals 130 to 160% ability damage to 9 targets in a 3x3 area. Quake also has 2 secondary effects. It decreases the damage level of your target by 5% and increases your base hit chance by 2. Let's take 2 seconds to talk about hit chance. It just means how much damage you can actually deal to the target, since splashing was basically removed from the game. Assault is a channeled ability and probably the strongest melee threshold. It has a 30-second cooldown and deals 125 to 115% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 4 hits. The last 2 threshold abilities share the same cooldown of 20.4 seconds and are either dual wield or two-hand specific. Destroy is a dual wield channeled ability that deals 120 to 140% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 4 hits. It will stun the target for 3.6 seconds and bind them for 6 seconds. Hurricane is its two-hand counterpart. However, instead of being a channeled ability, Hurricane is an AoE. It has 2 hits, the first dealing 120 to 150% ability damage to the primary target, and the second dealing 135 to 165% ability damage to the primary target and up to 8 additional targets in a 3x3 area. For ultimate abilities, there are 3 that are used in most situations. However, it's probably best to go over all the abilities so you at least know they exist. Massacre is a damage over time ability that is specific for dual wield. It has a 60-second cooldown and deals 100 to 120% ability damage on the first hit and 65% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 5 hits. It's pretty underwhelming, as you will see with the next 2 abilities. Frenzy is another dual wield ability and it functions very similarly to Flurry. It has a 60-second cooldown and deals 145 to 175% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 4 hits, and each hit increases by 10 to 20%. The main thing to note is that Frenzy is not an AoE. Pulverize is just as underwhelming. As you'll see with most ultimate abilities, Pulverize has a 60-second cooldown and deals 270 to 330% ability damage. It also reduces the target's damage by 25% for 30 seconds, and if it's a killing blow, you will generate 50% adrenaline. It is also two-hand specific. Now for the abilities we actually care about. Overpower, unlike other ultimate abilities, has a 30-second cooldown and deals 270 to 330% ability damage. Wait, were you expecting more from it? I mean, it does deal an additional hit if you are wearing the Igneous Calquette, as well as having a lower adrenaline cost. But I'm not covering that in this video. We'll save that for Volume 2. Meteor Strike is a two-handed AoE ability. Pretty similar story. 60-second cooldown, 270 to 330% ability damage to 9 targets in a 3x3 area. The thing to note with Meteor Strike is that any critical strikes for the next 30 seconds will generate an additional 8% adrenaline. Alright, best for last, right? Berserk is your main ultimate ability. It has a 60-second cooldown and increases all melee abilities other than bleeds by 2 times their ability damage for 20.4 seconds. There is one downside to it. You will take 50% more damage while Berserk is active. One last thing I'll add that I'll cover more in depth with Volume 2 is that if you are wearing at least 3 pieces of the Vestments of Havoc set, the duration of Berserk will be extended to 26.4 seconds. There are a decent amount of ability upgrades, so I'll try to keep this section brief. Blood Tendrils is a threshold ability unlocked from the Codex Ultimatus after completing the dig site. This bleed has a 45-second cooldown and deals 100 to 120% ability damage on its initial hit, and 50 to 60% ability damage every 1.2 seconds for 4 hits. This will also deal 27% of the initial hit back to you. Pretty common with all the Tendril abilities. I'm going to mention Bladed Dive here because it technically does damage, and is useful in some situations like clearing the pools at Raksha. It has a 20.4 second cooldown and functions similarly to Barge, moving your character up to 10 tiles toward your target, dealing 75 to 95% ability damage to all targets in that path. It's unlocked from the Shattered Worlds minigame for 63 million Shattered Anima. Moving on. Balanced Strike is an ultimate ability unlocked from completing the World Wakes quest. It has a 120 second cooldown, and the effect is so dumb that I see absolutely no reason to use it. You know the Pokemon attack Pain Split? That is the best example for this. Whoever has the higher percentage of life points will take that percentage of damage, and the other will be healed for 50% of whatever damage was dealt. How about an ability that actually matters? Chaos Roar is a basic ability that was introduced with Zamorak, and the Codex costs around 41 mil. It has a 60 second cooldown and deals 85 to 105% ability damage. And your next melee ability will deal 2 times its base damage. It's so damn good, and you can't beat it at that price. Now for the trio dropped from the Dragonkin Laboratory. Greater Flurry is dropped by Astalarn and is worth about 56 mil. It increases the ability damage to 100 to 120% per hit, and will decrease the cooldown of Berserk by 1.2 seconds for each hit. Greater Fury is dropped by Varric Lith and is an impressive 300 mil. The ability damage is now 120 to 140%, and your next melee ability is guaranteed to critically strike. Great to use to boost the damage of a threshold, as well as to generate extra adrenaline after using Meteor Strike. Last is Greater Barge, dropped by the Blackstone Dragon, worth close to 151 mil. There is no change to the ability damage or how it binds the target after use. However, there are 2 massive effects added. The first is that you will gain an additional 5 to 7% ability damage every tick since your last attack, refer back to the Combat Basics video for an explanation on ticks, up to 10 ticks. The second and more important effect is that after 4.8 seconds since your last ability, or 8 ticks, using Greater Barge will turn your next channeled ability within the next 6 seconds into a damage over time ability. Okay, the hard work is out of the way, let's actually get down to using your abilities. With basic abilities, you want a structure that is repeatable and plays nicely with Revolution if you choose to use it. That way, it makes thinking about what ability is next intuitive, and you can set up your keybinds accordingly. Let's use a triplet structure to help manage your ability cooldowns, as well as making sure you have good damage output. Starting with Sever, it has a 9-tick cooldown and can be used every 3 abilities. A great place to build your triplet from. After that, we'll use Fury or Greater Fury, both so you know where it is on your bar, and to increase the damage of your next ability, being either Decimate or Cleave, depending on what weapon you're using. For the second triplet, we'll add our other 15-second ability in the form of Dismember and then Havoc or Smash in the last slot. Again, depending on if you're using dual wield or two-hand. The last slot is reserved for Slice since it has a 3-second cooldown and can be used as a filler ability. Once you get to 100% adrenaline, it's time for Berserk. If you need an adrenaline refresher, watch the adrenaline video in the playlist. We want to make sure that we are saving as much adrenaline as possible since the effect of Berserk is relatively short. I'll be using the Vestments of Havoc set to increase the duration to 26.4 seconds, as well as using the following. The Ring of Vigor passive, saving me 10% adrenaline after using Berserk, the Conservation of Energy relic giving me another 10% adrenaline, the Igneous Calquette cape to reduce the adrenaline cost of Overpower, and Adrenaline Renewal potions to, well, renew my adrenaline by 40% over 6 seconds. I thought that was implied with the name. Please feel free to make some substitutions like a physical Ring of Vigor or even a lower tier of adrenaline potion. One small detail I left out about the vestments. If you're wearing 2 pieces of the outfit, using an ultimate ability will generate 15% adrenaline over 18 seconds, or 20% instantly if the effect is already active. Your maximum adrenaline also increases by 20% if you're wearing the full set. If you have Greater Barge, then start Berserk with that because of its effect. So we'll get off the target for 4.8 seconds, activate Berserk and drink our adrenaline renewal, and then use Greater Barge. Because we have so much adrenaline and thinking about ability cooldowns, if we activate Destroy now, it'll become a bleed as well as being available for at least 2 hits at the end of Berserk. So, we will bleed Destroy, then Chaos Roar to boost the damage of Overpower. After that, we still have enough adrenaline to fully channel Greater Flurry to reduce the cooldown of Berserk into Assault. Now we will use our strongest basic abilities until Destroy is back off cooldown. And we should have enough time for 2 hits from it. Since adrenaline potions have a 2-minute cooldown, the next time you use Berserk will be a bit different. We'll still have the same start being Berserk into Greater Barge, but depending on if you're using the mobile perk, I'll explain this more in the Inventions for Dummies video, you will need to use 1 or 2 basic abilities before bleeding Destroy. After that, build adrenaline with 3 basics, with the last being Chaos Roar to again boost the damage of Overpower. Then basics until you can use Flurry, then build again to use Assault. Again, this is not the most optimized rotation, but it gives you an idea of how to use the abilities in an intuitive way. Melee is all about dumping as much adrenaline as you can in the shortest amount of time. However, the rabbit hole of switches gives it one of the steepest learning curves out of any other combat style. Thank you for watching. There are a few links in the description for you to check out, as well as on screen now. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next one, and as always, stay caffeinated.